Greetings, my internet friends. Welcome to Walking and Talking. I'm paying very close attention to what's going on right now. At least I am trying to convince myself that that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to talk in a very closely self-monitored way, or something like that. Or maybe what I'm trying to do is focus my attention in a somewhat granular way on the act of speaking right now. It seems like the only appropriate thing to do, if you will. I don't know. It's at least seems like as if that is potentially a decent centering activity, to just focus on what I'm saying and to respond to it somehow. But even as such, even so, I'm finding at this moment that the options for what to say are still a little overwhelming. All right. As is this wind. Has me feeling like the day is cursed. Because I keep finding the things that I say and think to be veering into directions that I judge as not good for the purposes of this particular activity of communicating to you. As in, I'm repeatedly finding my mind veering in directions that don't seem of particular relevance to you, dear listener. And then I wonder to myself, is this just not the day for it? Or is this all somehow potentially an acceptable part of this episode of Walking and Talking? Is it acceptable this, what maybe I would call distraction, or maybe I would call it a bad mood or something like that. So my question is it possible to respond to this seemingly sub-ideal mental behavior that I'm witnessing in a way that makes it at least acceptable or even interesting. I mean, as I'm talking about it more and more, I suppose that the talking about it is beginning in a way to kind of resemble a little bit more closely the preconceived, although somewhat nebulous, conception that I have in my mind of what this is supposed to be like. And also to think to myself that a certain amount of scatteredness and confusion, or in other words, difficulty, is quite par for the course, especially in the beginning of an episode of Walking and Talking, where I'm almost always attempting to sort out what it is I am actually doing, what the purpose is, what is worth focusing on, what direction to go in, etc. And something like a mental or emotional residue left over from problematic conditions leading up to the actual act of walking and talking. You know, malfunctioning equipment, strange encounters, and so forth. Is not so unexpected. And as I kind of observe my tone of speaking now, it seems relatively calmer. Also, the goddamn wind is not blowing as hard at the moment. And I begin to feel that this act of talking is beginning to settle into sort of a self-referential territory that in some ways is like less fraught, or seems to have little emotional bearing. And while certainly the self-referential quality of it does make it seem devoid of something like actual substance or content, you know, that aligns perfectly well with what I tend to think this is about or not about, as in it being essentially not really about anything other than itself. And I feel right now somewhat of a lessening of any kind of imperative for this to be anything in particular, meaning to cover any particular type of content or to have any particular type of tone to it, such as, you know, anything like profundity or humor or entertainment value, etc. I feel actually a pretty relieving sense that this doesn't have to do anything for you or for me. As in, this doesn't even have to entertain you. I don't have to really even say anything interesting or say things in an interesting way for you. It's a little bit as if I'm disregarding you, but at the same time I'm not really disregarding you. I'm regarding that, you know, you are in fact a person having an experience, and you are giving to this at least some amount of attention, apparently. You know, I'm aware that, like, this talking is necessarily at least some component of your experience. And, you know, I there's no problem in saying that, because just self-evidently this talking here is a part of your experience. Apparently. So I am regarding you, but I don't honestly feel any need to like do anything to influence the quality of your experience. Maybe subconsciously I am, you know. Maybe subconsciously I have ulterior motives. That's quite plausible. However, just in this moment, as I kind of examine this experience, I'm reporting upon, you know, a sort of quality of at least my experience, which kind of like is only perceivable, I think, or only salient, really, in contrast to something that I can remember feeling before. You know, it's like I only noticed this thing that I'm talking about in relation to something before, so it was a change in something about my experience. And like I said before, the change is that there's a falling off of any kind of feeling of pressure to perform in a certain way, or feeling of pressure to you know, influence my own experience, shape my own experience in some particular direction, and also to shape your experience in a particular direction. But sort of maybe a little bit paradoxically, at the same time, of course, we could say that that is a particular characteristic of experience, at least mine. And you know, I'm kind of guessing that it's possible that there's some mirror effect and you may be experiencing something similar on your end. By having, you know, by understanding that, just even understanding verbally the things that I'm saying, and by the phenomenon of like emotional mirroring and that sort of thing. You know, this particular characteristic, you could call it a particular characteristic of not being in a state of particularly desiring a particular quality of experience. It actually does seem maybe very particular when I think about it that way. And also, it kind of strikes me as desirable. This particular way that I feel as if I'm increasingly feeling which I just moments ago described as the absence of pressure, the absence of desire to feel a particular way, or to influence you to feel a particular way, now strikes me as being describable as feeling a particular way, and feeling a particular way that is desirable, as in I don't feel so much this emotional tension that I can remember feeling not very long ago, closer to the beginning of this video. And now, when I think and remember back to what I can remember as being kind of the opposite of this experience, the opposite feeling, it was just like a kind of mild distress and like confusion with you know, the typical negative connotation, the negative emotional valence to it, of and feeling this, well, we could also call it like an emotional disequilibrium that was propelling me to experience something different. And as I was framing it before, I was talking about my mindset. I was like questioning, am I in a bad mindset? And is it acceptable to be in this bad mindset? I mean, I was even questioning several times whether I was even going to be able to continue this video, or whether I just kind of give up for the day and try it again another day, chalk it up to unfavorable circumstances, or some idea of it being just a cursed day for it, you know? But then now, and so like, in one sense, it might be, one could simply enough say something like, my mindset changed into a more positive or open one. My mindset changed into a more desirable state to be in. And that would, you know, be kind of like a valid and normal framing of the flow of experience. But that, I don't think that was exactly it. And it would be a little bit more accurate to say something like, I went through some process of not even rejecting, not like of kind of accepting that experience of being confused and like mildly distressed. And that came about through simply, you know, questioning what really are the kind of like conceptual parameters of this activity that I'm doing, the walking and talking. And I think, you know, kind of realizing that feeling confused and suboptimal is not in any way against the rules here. There's no parameter stating, you know, that I have to be feeling good at all, or that I have to be in some kind of flow state, or be focused, or be articulate, or to say things of interest, or to say things that are entertaining or profound or insightful or anything like that. And so I did find myself questioning these two alternatives of giving up the video, going home, trying another day, or continuing forward with this mindset that from its own perspective seems undesirable, but then being like, can I just kind of stop, you know, trying to get away from this state? And then, I mean, and then now I remember more clearly like when I realized that for you, I don't have to do anything for you. I don't have to be a particular way for you. or for me, it would seem that there was some change there. But was there really like a change from one state to another? Because if I if I think back to it, there wasn't the sort of change of where like feeling one way stopped and then like feeling another way started or something. It was all continuous, I think. I mean, as far as I can honestly frame the flow of experience, and you know, while we're relating to things in a temporal type of framework, I would say that I'm just saying that it's not like a positive experience is existing like independently of a negative experience. It's more like, I mean, if you've been watching up till now, maybe you would understand that it's more like a exploding and dissipation of these positive or negative valences to things. And now, you know, I do feel this very wide swath of options for how to speak and what to talk about, but it's not, that doesn't feel overwhelming. Or in a sense, I could say it does feel overwhelming, but there's not a particularly negative valence towards the overwhelm. There's not a negative response to overwhelm. And so in that sense, maybe overwhelm is not exactly the most representative word for it. But it is like, it's whelm. It's whelm. I mean, it's funny that overwhelming may have a negative connotation most of the time, but underwhelming always has a negative connotation. So like whelming seems to be the target. That's what we want. To be whelmed. Just right. Anyhow, what seems like a development now is that while I seem to be describing a quality of experience of feeling free from imperative to speak in a way that would elicit some sort of perceived value, whether it be interest or just coherence or insight or entertainment or whatever, or even articulateness, now I'm finding that in the process of describing that, now I would describe my way of describing that as potentially having some of those qualities, as in at least being reasonably articulate and coherent, and being somewhat focused, I think. And that if I think about it, I could say that everything that I've been saying for the past several minutes has kind of been, focusing in on a fairly narrow range of a particular change of experience. As in, it could be said that everything that I am referring to was something that had just occurred in like a very short span of time. But now when I look at the qualities of the way that I find myself talking now, it seems as if it has diverged from the quality of experience that I am describing. As in, maybe you remember, I've spent a very long time, it seems now, describing the quality of experience of feeling free from the imperative of having certain particular qualities of experience, and experiencing that in a sense as relieving and as freeing and as a certain lightness and freedom, you could say. A certain lightness and freedom as a quality of my experience of not desiring particular qualities of experience, but paradoxically, that in itself being a particular quality of experience, at least as describable as such, at least it's frameable as such, that freedom deriving in a sense of the acceptance of what might be described as undesirable qualities of thought and experience and undesirable qualities of speaking, such as incoherence, scatteredness, vagueness, distractedness, or preoccupation with particular phenomena in experience. Like, say for instance, being preoccupied by what I would have called material conditions, say for instance the threat of the dysfunction of my camera and so on and so forth. And so deriving this feeling of, what I'm describing as openness, but might better be described as like a lack of strong characteristics to experience, deriving from the acceptance of like certain types of banality, or certain types of like incompetence, or lacklusterness, or mediocrity, and so forth. And then finding that through the process of just talking about those things, that I find that Now, this seems all describable in terms that are kind of opposite that, in the sense that I could describe the way that I'm speaking as very focused, in the sense that it is all seeming to like dig deeper into one thing, as opposed to erratically shifting from one thing to the other. At least that's how I seem to be perceiving it, as in like it's narrowing in to the object of description, rather than being distracted and moving the frame from one phenomenon to the next phenomenon. And so I would describe that as focusing in. Also, I would describe it as having this very abstract quality to it, in the sense that it seems as if the way that I'm talking is like could be said to be like going up in levels of abstraction, in the sense that I am talking about ways that I'm talking, that I'm seem to be analyzing the experience of analyzing the experience of analyzing the experience, and so on and so forth, and that nothing that I am saying seems to really refer to much external to this. I mean, maybe in some ways I'm referring to things external to the talking itself, in a sort of temporal sense, in which I'm continuously referring to something that happened previously and prior. But I guess I would say that for the most part, the talking has continued this self-referential quality that is interesting, that it seems to like be continually generating itself, like generating this content, you could say, if you want to call it content. You could also quite reasonably call it absence of content, in that it's so self-referential, yet there's still meaning happening. And I don't mean meaning in any kind of ultimate sense of like understanding everything, but I'm saying that there's meaning occurring like in the intertextual sense, or just in the relative sense, in that each thing I say, like each word that I say and each sentence that I say, you can understand it. Like you understand this, and it has meaning in relation to the other things that it refers to, like usually the previous sentence or the previous several sentences, or maybe it has meaning in relation to how our encapsulation of the entire video thus far, and so on and so forth. And I'm following normal English grammar and syntax, and so there is this meaning in, at least in the in kind of the immediate small-grained sense. You know, this is like, technically speaking, meaningful language. But however, on the grander scale, it could also be said to be very meaningless, in that it is not like, it's not doing much to refer to or explain or elucidate anything beyond kind of itself, or this experience, like the experience of continuing to talk. You know what I mean? And I find kind of within this something a little bit hard to describe going on, in that as I start to experience or like witness this experience as being sort of like this self-generating phenomenon, like as I kind of, and particularly the mental aspect of it, the thought part of it, but as well as in examining like what I would refer to as the sensory experience of, let's say, experiencing myself talk and experiencing these thoughts come out of me. There's something like what I would describe as, I want to, I'm initially jumping to describe it as a change in my experience to being like disidentified with the self that is speaking, and more like witnessing the speaking going on, or it's like, or at least it seems kind of as if there's some kind of shift in my attention, where it's like it feels closer to like this is just kind of going on. But then I'm like, is it, how can that be if I'm describing that very shift in attention? How can that be if I'm describing the experience of being disidentified with the experience? Then aren't I then again just identifying with the experience of disidentifying? Like, who or what is doing the disidentifying? Like who or what is then witnessing this? And then when I think about that, it's like then again there's another step of disidentifying with something occurring. I feel like I'm walking in quicksand here. But then I'm like, yeah, and then like I'm like, is that even actually possible? As in to like continuously disidentify from all observed phenomena, all like sensory experience or mental experience? Is it possible for there to be talking even without a subject attached to the talking? I mean, no, right? But like, say for instance, in your experience, it's like you're just hearing this. There's just some talking that is some component of your experience, and obviously you have no control over what is said next. But I'm almost I feel almost as if I don't actually have control over what gets said next. As in, like when I look at it, like I'm trying to like look at like where is this locus of control that is deciding what to say and then doing it. Because if I look right in the real time of saying something, like I'm observing the whatever sensations are present from my mouth moving and sound coming out, when I'm observing that, it's like that has, I guess I would say in the moment, that has more akin to like observing the waves on the water than it has akin to like being these words, like the movements of my mouth aren't me, and the sound coming out of my mouth isn't me. And then when I try to like find all the factors that that combine to lead towards what in particular is being said, like I can't identify any of those as being particularly me. But then of course, like, you know, what do I even mean by me, and so on and so forth, and that whole thing. I mean, it seems kind of futile, really. It seems kind of futile. Because, like, at the same time, I'm just like, a thought comes to me that's like, just come off this whole inquiry, because obviously, there's a difference between you and me. And that I'm here talking, and you're listening. And just to leave it, you know, leave it alone. because now I feel some kind of imperative to get to the root of those sorts of questions, and to not leave off any, like incompletely examined ideas, to not be leaving blind spots. And now I wonder, like, can I achieve the same sort of freedom from the imperative of, like, for instance, thinking thoroughly about things, thinking and to be thinking thoroughly and consistently about everything. And past experience tells me that it's not possible to think completely thoroughly and completely consistently about everything. That it's kind of one or the other. That if you want to think consistently about things, you won't be able to cover everything. And that if you think completely thoroughly about everything, about anything even, take one thing and think completely thoroughly about it, that it'll always end up in self-contradiction. Take any field, whether it be a field of thought and inquiry, or some kind of practice, and you do it perfectly thoroughly, I find that always it leads to a point that where it kind of vitiates itself, where it reveals its own, not only just limitations, but its own, like, meaninglessness. Like, just as an example, like in the field of physics, and when physics it's like kind of the whole impulse of science as a field, and particularly physics, is to be thorough and consistent about the descriptions of our world, and matter and forces, matter and energy. To just have a thorough and consistent description of the world, of reality. And then, as we proceed through that thoroughness, which leading us into the experiments involved in quantum mechanics, and then we come to this observer dependency, and we find that it's the observation and interrelation between things that even define anything such as matter or energy existing. I mean, forgive me if I'm not really a physicist, so forgive me if I'm making mistakes here. But my general interpretation of it is that the way things are observed is what is actually constituting reality. Which, if you really take seriously the implications of that, in some sense, it really pulls the rug out of the entire endeavor of physics. Which, was always trying to proceed objectively, was always trying to determine what objective reality is, what objectively there is out there, and to let us subjects understand it as clearly as possible. And then, the closer we got to objectivity, it went full cycle into subjectivity. That whole thing. But the same kind of process would apply to other things as well. It's like you think about like Zen practice and the acceptance of everyday mind. And the non-dichotomy between like enlightenment and practice and everyday life. And it's like whatever sort of realization that would ostensibly lie at the end of something like Zen or other meditative practices, I would say entails I would say that it entails the end of the duality between enlightenment and anything else. Therefore, like vitiating the meaning of any kind of concept of enlightenment, because of course it's like, if enlightenment means, perfect unity with everything, then who is left to be enlightened? Obviously no one. It seems just like the clearest thing to me. It seems as clear as day that there is no such thing as enlightenment, as as a state or anything permanent, or even as like a objective quality that a person could have. Because the whole meaning of it is completely as dependent on all other meanings as anything else. Like, to be a perfect person, like, who defines what that is? And who would ever think that that's a static objective quality? The perfect person would always have to be defined socially, and that's always dynamic and changing. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion. I mean, of course, a person could conform to varying degrees or not conform to varying degrees of societal standards of morality. But whenever has a society had perfect standards of morality? Never. And they never will. There's no objectively perfect morality. It's always fucking complicated. And there's no perfect understanding of the world. Understanding means not understanding something else. I mean, to understand one thing just means drawing the lines in a particular way, or aligning your mental state with some particular map of the world, which necessarily precludes other understandings. One understanding precludes other understandings. There's no objective one. Like what we call objective reality is more like consistency between multiple subjects. And there is, you could say, a relative truth and a relative objectivity. You can kind of say. You can sort of, maybe kind of say that there's a relative truth between things, as in relative consistency between multiple observing subjects. For example, you know, the Earth being a large sphere that orbits the sun does have a much higher consistency across multiple observing subjects than, say, for instance, the world resting upon a turtle shell and the sun being a speck on the inside of a great dome that exists outside the Earth and orbits around it. Know what I'm saying? Like the Earth being round exhibits a vastly higher relative consistency across multiple observations and multiple observing subjects than does the Earth being flat. And this is all relative, of course. You know, because other interpretations of physics or metaphysics call into question, you know, things like just what exactly matter is and what exactly space-time is, and so on and so forth. Anyhow, this is all really pointless. Like all of this gets us nowhere. Don't have any illusions. Don't have any illusions that you are having your illusions dispelled. Don't have any illusion that there's anything other than illusion for us to experience. And by illusion, I just mean that the phenomenal world of experience is all manifestations of emptiness, you could say, or nothing. As in, like, And forgive me if this is a little bit disconnected from what I was saying before, or that the connection between them is not perfectly apparent, or that if I'm making a claim here, that I seem to be making a claim, and I do seem to be making a claim here, principally negative claims about what is not. Forgive me if the claims are not thoroughly backed up at this point, but I will try to explain. But don't have any illusions that what I'm explaining, is going to get us anywhere. For the very reasons that I just explained. So when I say that, like, all of phenomenal experience, and what I mean by that is like what you might call the objective world, or even what you would call the subjective world of what you own experience, like, everything that you can experience, whether you think of it as being outside of yourself or a part of yourself, whether you think of it as physical, material, or mental, like the thoughts that you experience, or bodily, like the emotions that you experience, or phenomenal, like more abstract and phenomenal, like change, like the experience of change. Whatever. Just anything that can be experienced at all. Meaning effectively anything in reality. I'm saying as a manifestation of emptiness, or you could call it nothing. In the sense that if you really observe, whatever the thing is, whatever the phenomenon is, whether it's like something like an object of your perception, whether it be something you see or hear or feel, or something that you perceive, more internally, like thoughts, or a concept even. If you really dig into it and look for the substance of it, you'll never locate it. And you'll always come up with that it only could be said to exist at all, like in relation to some other phenomenon, some related phenomenon, that all sensory experiences change from one state to another. All conceptual content only has any substance in relation to other conceptual content. And then even if you go over to that other stuff that gives it meaning, that it's the same way that it itself doesn't have anything inherent to it, that it's all interrelation. And so you never come up with anything. You never come up with anything. Even as regards like your own subjectivity, like that which is witnessing all of this. I mean, like, maybe some people will say, oh yeah, well, the witness is consistent. The witness is eternal. You know, that which experiences the emptiness. Maybe there's something to that. Could there be? That which experiences change would have to be something consistent, right? Or that which experiences the substancelessness of things would have to be something of substance, wouldn't it? It sort of seems like that. But I can't honestly say that I can grasp onto something like that. But for instance, like, to backtrack a little bit, how I was talking about, different, let's say different scientific conceptions of reality, and, including in that even like such ridiculous notions as flat Earth and, the Earth resting upon a turtle's shell. Just including all those as like conceptions of the world, worldviews. And worldviews not being distinct even from just like individual conceptions, individual experiences. Like, these worldviews only differing in that they may be held by a collective of people, a plurality of people, more than one individuated subject. But essentially there's no it's just kind of like a difference in quantity or something, or differences in comprehensiveness, or differences in the relative amount of consistency between, say, one person's personal opinion about things and something that's like a scientific theory or a religious conception of reality. All that I'm saying is that any of these worldviews the only sense that they can be said to have to hold any water is in a relative sense, in that these worldviews relate to a certain subject, whether that be an individual subject or a collective subject, like a society. That those worldviews are, in fact, expressions of the certain aims of those subjects. Like, they are expressions of the certain shall we say, like, they're expressions of the structure of the subject, and they're like ways that the subject survives. It's like they have, like, the worldview, the way the world is perceived at all, perceived or conceived at all, can be thought of in some sense as like a part of the survival mechanism of the subject, of the perceiver. For instance, like a Christian view of the world, the Christian creationist view of the world that includes heaven and hell, which you can't see. And a judging God. Has a function to it of imposing particular moralities and imposing a particular social structure. And conveniently, we see these monotheistic worldviews always present they're only emerging in societies that have a monarchy, really. Like, it's like the monotheistic religions are a component of a certain social order that involves a monarch handing down the rules of how people will behave and interact in society, and even how they'll interact economically. And it includes these like very strong, compelling stories, such as the afterlife, where you're going to go to hell and suffer eternally, or go to heaven and be blissed out eternally, as these kind of very strong imperatives to compel people to behave in a certain way in their mortal life, their comparatively infinitely short time on the earth. If you're talking about eternity and the option of suffering eternally or being in bliss eternally, then the limited time that we have on the earth is, in comparison, infinitely short. So even if there's a chance that this story is true, then we'd better, not risk eternal damnation. And so it would seem worth conforming to the moral codes of the day. Even if it makes our lives suck in the meantime. But then just to say, like, so that's, just one kind of example of a collective worldview, and it's like that's how the world is perceived to be. Like, it's like a person of a certain time and upbringing, a person of a certain society, will tell you without a shadow of a doubt, God created the earth and heaven and hell. in his image. And then, a person of a different time and a slightly different society would have the more rational, scientific story of existence, of reality, and say that there exist objective laws of nature out there already, and our task as humans is to learn about and thus get closer and closer to fully understanding these objective laws that exist out there already. And then I would venture to say that the worldview, and that, and they would say, a person of that persuasion is kind of unconvincible otherwise. It's like that is their worldview. It's like you try to convince them that God created the world in his image. It just doesn't work, because that doesn't line up that's inconsistent with experience and observation and so on and so forth. But now I'm suggesting that rational scientific viewpoint, taken to its own logical conclusions, has in a sense vitiated itself when we got down to the granularity of quantum mechanics, and the implication from that is actually not that there are these objective laws of nature out there that we humans are just in relative states of ignorance to, and we can get closer and closer to the truth. It's something more like that there is no objective reality beyond beyond the way that we are perceiving, like that the would-be laws of nature are actually reflections of how we are as humans, how our cognition and perception work. And this has a lot of evidence behind it. When you look at the most recent and cutting edge physics experiments and theoretical physics as well, just the notion that time and space are not objective structures of reality, but they are structures of how we people perceive reality. Time and space are cognitive tools. So then when you get into this area of there not being an objective reality, It's a very dramatic shift, I would say. Because the whole reality of it is like constantly undermining everything. It seems like if I even if I just look at even if we just look at the way that I'm talking now and the way that there is at least ostensibly some perceived meaning in the way in my manner of speaking, at least relatively so, in that one thing sort of follows from the next. I mean, maybe there's inconsistencies or gaps or blind spots that I'm overlooking, but at least in principle, you can kind of understand things that I'm saying. In principle, at least. And that I'm speaking in a way that at least seems to make claims about reality, even if they be mostly negative claims. It's like, how can any of this even exist if there's no, or does it even exist? You know, it's like now reasonable to ask. And like I would say that you could take maybe like this walking and talking episode as, like, think of it as a model, and that if you really look at it, it's like one thing that I say only has any meaning in relation to another thing that I say. And that, I mean, you can judge this for yourself, like at the conclusion of your experience or afterwards or whatever. Like, was in all of that, what was the takeaway? Did you actually understand anything, or just like, was that anything at all? Just, you know, when it gets to the end of this, ask yourself, was that anything at all? Or ask yourself, what was that talking about? What was that 4-hour video that I just watched or listened to about? And if I remember back and I think about all the previous ones, the closest thing I can say to an honest answer is that they're not about anything. They're not really anything. They don't exactly do anything. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in some way. Or, I mean, I'm sure that it's interpretable in the opposite way too. That I'm sure there's a way to interpret that, to say that they do something. Maybe it's just me as the person doing it. I'm not good at articulating that. Or maybe to rephrase that more accurately, is that such a meaning as something like doing something or like having an effect would be like an interrelation sort of thing, like that it would take another person to confirm that. It would take another person who has interacted with this to say that it has or has not done something, and that's not a meaningful evaluation for me to say myself. You know what I mean? Which is another kind of example of that. For anything, for any apparent substance is relative, as in it's relational, as in a substance is between 2 points, either two or more people or two or more ideas or concepts or two or more perceptions. But that all of those added up amount to nothing at all. Which I'm kind of here to say that nothing at all can sort of be, I mean, not even glimpsed. Like you can't actually glimpse or apprehend it in any real way, but that because it's so nothing that, you know, it's not something that can be perceived or really even thought of directly. But that in the process of you know, trying to do something thoroughly, or trying to do something for a very long time, or trying to focus on something carefully, or trying even to complete anything, that this emptiness or whatever can be indirectly inferred by like the continued like non-substance experienced in everything. You know what I mean? You know what I mean. You know what I mean. It manifests as just like the perpetual incompleteness of everything. The perpetual incompleteness of all of your endeavors and yourself as a project, or yourself as anything. The incompleteness of your subjectivity. You know, the way that you're not all of the subjectivity. You're only some of it. You're only a particular point of view in the world. The incompletability of even understanding the world. that the nothing is so you know, perfectly nothing, that the more you would seem to approach it, the more it seems to generate new somethings to keep the gap, to keep you from ever closing the gap between you and it. Like if you ever were at a lack of more somethings, which it's like, who has that problem, you know? For more stuff to experience. It's just like, go ahead, just try and approach nothing. You know? Try and approach nothing. And all of the somethings will continually generate. Kind of like meditation. Like, try and attempt not to think, and you'll become keenly aware. Of a whole lot of mental content that is like really inexhaustible in supply. But when I say that, I don't mean the kind of hackneyed Buddhist idea that you know, like that I'm not making this hackneyed Buddhist statement about the nature of human minds as being like always chattery, and therefore there's an imperative that you must meditate in order to realize the chatteriness of your mind and to quiet it down, and so on and so forth. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the perfect quiet doesn't even exist. That the nothing doesn't even exist. Even let's say, for argument's sake, that let's say some kind of state of mind of no thought is possible. But the state of mind of like absolutely no content, no experience, is not actually possible. As in, but the opposite is also going to be painfully true, as I'm going to get to in a moment. But the point I'm making here is that like even like a purported state of mind describable as no thought, if you're reporting that as a state of mind, there absolutely must be some other content of experience that you have registered and perceived and remembered in order to report that there was this duration of time in which I experienced no thought. But that is actually bullshit, because I mean, it's not bullshit, like it's like somebody could validly have that framing of experience, but it necessarily means that you had a different experience for some duration of time, and maybe that different experience was like your attention was on your breath, or your attention was on your physical sensations rather than your thoughts. But that itself is also mental and is also a type of thought, as in the reporting of, say, this duration of time of like something else that report and that memory is thought, and it's mental in nature. And even the construct of like your breath or your physical sensation, like let's say you're doing Vipassana and you're observing your physical sensations of your body and you're scanning your body, and you're like, yeah, I was in a really good flow where there wasn't, any discursive chatter in my mind, and I was just observing the sensations of my body. But I'm going to say that that experience is also just a different shape of thought, and that what you're perceiving as your body having sensations is also necessarily a mental construction, as in, what are those sensations? And you're sitting there with your eyes closed, and your mind is actively involved in framing these sensations as, indicating the states of your body. And importantly, your mind is actively involved in delineating what counts as like the limitations of your body, as in like those sensations, just like they say, if you go and do one of those Goenka courses, like just like he says, those sensations, Goenka is like framing those sensations that you're feeling as exchanges of energy, which is, as true as anything else. Like, your nerves, physical sensation does involve electrical signaling moving through your nerves, which, originate in some kind of change in energy state that occurs somewhere in the boundary of your skin. But what that is indicating is not a boundary, but it's indicating a continuity between your skin and the air. I mean, this is a very, very old philosophical argument that, like, if you can feel something, if you can see something, that is not indicating the separation of your body from the rest of the world. It's indicating the continuity between your body and the rest of the world, because there is some kind of change that is transversing that would-be boundary, and the would-be boundary is just a site of connection. If you can feel anything, if you can see anything or hear anything, like, these are all just like sites of continuity. And so, like, this is why I'm saying that, like, the idea of like a mind state of perfect, like, quiet of the thought, and just observe, and for instance, just like observing physical sensation, that mind state is itself a mental construction, whether experienced in time, like, in the present, or as remembered. Which is not to say something like is not anything to say like you could mentally control always, like, what the sensations that you have are. Like, it's not that you can mentally control the content of your sensations. It doesn't really have anything to do with control. But the real point that I'm trying to get to here is that, like, this is all just like kind of an example of like an attempt to get towards some form of nothingness. So like if you're doing Vipassana, then they are continually holding a carrot out in front of you, the carrot of enlightenment, you know, where like it's like all framed as like, you know, you're sitting there scanning your body, and then like eventually like you'll experience this like, you know, total like dissolution of boundaries, and you'll experience becoming one with the universe, and then you'll suddenly be like enlightened and like relieved of all like you'll be relieved of all suffering and like any negative human qualities, and you'll become a saint. You'll become like a Buddha like person who, you know, just effortlessly and perfectly like helps the world. It's ridiculous, you know. Like and like it's like all the components of that idea are ridiculous. Okay, maybe a ridiculous is a strong word, but let's just say that there being like a final attainment there is just not possible. It's incongruent with the way reality is. And so I'm saying, like, you know, giving up that search. I don't know. Maybe you don't have. Maybe it's not actually possible to give up the searching aspect of living. You know, I don't think it is. Like, because at the same time, it's like you have these like non-duality jokers out there being like, call off the search, like give it up, and then you'll like experience non-duality or something, and you can't. It's like definitionally, just like you can think about this like very logically and simply. You cannot experience non-duality, because who would be left to do to experience something? Who would experience what? What would be left to be experienced, and what would be left to do the experiencing if there's no duality? Like, non-duality is like, by the very logical definition of it, non-experiential. There's no experience to it. Experience itself is the same as separation. And so in a sense, so like as I was, when I was saying before, how like you can't ever get to the nothing, or you can't ever like have like a non-experience, obviously. And I think I alluded to briefly how at the same time the opposite is true. And what I mean by that is that this non-experiential, non-duality, which is the same as emptiness or the same as nothingness, also in this other way can be said to be what absolutely everything is, what absolutely everything is constituting and is an expression of. And that, like, all of the duality and all of the experience, all of the myriad forms and all the particularity of experience and all the incompleteness of experience, the fact that you know, it certainly seems like you and I are both particular individuals who have a different point of view, that we can, and that you and I can never 100% have the same point of view. And that it certainly keeps seeming like there can be a me and there can be a you and there can be a me versus what's not me. And that it certainly seems like there's this continual experience of stuffs, and I can point out to the particular and investigate the particular and dig into things or not dig into things. That it certainly seems like there's anything at all. And beyond that, that there's a incomprehensible amount of stuff. There's an inexhaustible fount of phenomena to be experienced in life. That this is all of this stuff, all of that is the perfect expression of nothing, of nothingness, of a pure non-experience and non-duality. And that if, as I'm saying, and which seems kind of like, which seems self-apparent, this notion that the nothing cannot be experienced and cannot be, like, you know, apprehended really, conceptually even. I mean, like, I guess we're kind of sort of trying or something, or going in that direction, it seems like. That if the nothing is, you know, definitionally non-experiential and non-experienceable, then, like, there's a sense where it could say it's perfectly present, and it's like eternally present. It's like perfectly and eternally present. And it's with its self-consistency of not being experienceable, you know? And I suppose you could say that, like, you know, certain, like, certain religious thinkers would say a similar thing in, like, talking about God or something, that God as kind of like, you know, God as, so it's kind of like an abstraction or an ideal, is like perfectly consistent and perfectly present in everything in God's like you know, inconceivability, in that like there's sort of a logical and natural difference or contrast, you know, like a perfect mirrored contrast, even not perfectly mirrored, but a perfect contrast between, you know, the human and our mortality and our fallibility, and God in God's immortality, infallibility, omniscience, etc. Like God's, you know, is almost kind of like definitionally something not attainable or fully apprehendable by a human who is definitionally limited, mortal, fallible, incomplete. So there's kind of like a similar thread to that, between that and what I'm saying, just about something in talk. I'm using different terminology of like reality, but then like I don't tend to put it in God's term, in the terms of God, because there's way too much sort of baggage attached to that, and like with like I think to a lot of people it brings to mind like a human like creature, like it always, the problem is that it always brings to mind an image at all, you know, and usually like a guy, like an old guy with a beard, and like who's just like a really big guy, but it's not, it's, you know, a big guy like that, that's like just way, you know, not enough, that's like way inadequate. But I guess I'm kind of trying to speak in more abstract terms, or I'm trying to speak in terms that's like really more just kind of like language based, and cutting across the ways in which we kind of think logically about the world. Maybe because like in a relative sense, if I'm thinking in these more kind of abstract terms, or just thinking in terms of like logic, that actually feels to me like closer, a little bit closer to reflecting the impossible thing to get at that I'm hinting towards, than does something with like sort of a more like image, like visual image, like something that brings to mind visual representations. In some ways feels like it's more diversion. But to get back to just like the notion of nothing, seems really, in a sense, to be like the only like perfectly like self-consistent concept. In the sense of like self-consistent in the sense of like it seems logically self-apparent that nothing could not be experienced. I mean, like, you could say you experienced a relative nothing, in the sense that you could say, I walked into a room and there was nothing in it. I walked into the room and it was empty. And so there's a relative nothing there, but it's that kind of nothing is only framed by somethings, you know, like the walls of the room itself, and it's nothing, as opposed to there being something tangible in that room. But it's not really nothing. It's just like that nothing is still, in a sense, a mental construction that's constructed in opposition to something, namely like the floor and the walls of the room, and is it's a nothing that is kind of created by a context of something, the room being the context. And so you could say that you experienced nothing, but no, actually you just experienced a duration of time being in a room, and you actually experienced a lot of content. There's like you saw the walls and the floor and so on and so forth. Or like there's or other kind of like relative types of nothing. There's a really interesting anecdote that I read in an essay by Martin Gardner, who there was in New York City, there was an elevated train line that was taken away. They stopped the train line permanently. And when they stopped this train route, this elevated train route, the police suddenly started getting all of these calls from people waking up in the middle of the night who were calling and saying like they heard something. Like something like they couldn't quite pinpoint what it was, but like something was not right. Like they were waking up in their slumber from something, and they were actually waken up by the absence of the sound of the train rumbling by. You know, it's like they had lived all their lives, or at least long enough, right next to an elevated train with like regular trains running by, that they got used to that as the ground of existence. And then when the train stopped, they were startled by the absence of a noise. Or another anecdote I can recall from that same essay was, and I think this is like a story of a story of a story, that there was an island that was always experiencing strong winds. There was always strong wind blowing in from the sea in one particular direction. And then one day, and there were like people with farms and animals on the island. And one day, there was a day with no wind. The wind stopped for a little bit, and all the chickens fell over. Ha ha ha. So, it's like there's all these examples of a kind of relative nothing that is in fact itself a kind of something. Like, it's like people startled by the nothing, or the chickens falling over because of an absence of the wind. And so when I talk about a perfect nothing as being something that doesn't even, well, a perfect nothing, I guess, like, would just be is a nothing that's implied by all of the somethings, all of the phenomena of experience. And it's implied that this nothing is not possible to experience in any way. And so there's no, therefore it has no quality of space. It doesn't entail any space, you know. There's no physical extent to it. There's no locality to it. It's not anywhere. There's no place of this, you know, perfect nothing. And it has no time. It has no temporality. It has no, you know, in its experienceableness, there's no time in which it exists, and it has no beginning or ending. There's no temporal extent of it. Which means you could call it eternal, but the eternal, I think, is like implying like time, you know, namely a time that doesn't begin or end. But so I mean, you could call it eternal, but you would have to give equal weight to just like nothing, no time. It's like when I think about eternal, it's like, honestly, I can't actually think about eternal. Like that's another, like, eternity, that's another thing you can't logically think of. I mean, I can think of thinking of it, sort of, but I can't think of I can't think of a time without beginning or end. You know, I can't grasp it. And so I'm saying that, like, a pure nothingness is perfectly self-consistent in its non-existence in space, and its non-existence in time, and its non-experientialness. And in that sense, it's there's sort of a sense in which it pervades everything. Or, I mean, pervades is a weird way to say it, but, or that everything, all phenomena, temporal and spatial and experienced or not, you know, is constituting it. Which is weird, you know. It's like, logically that sounds wrong. And that if I'm saying there's something, that then the something necessarily precludes the nothing. But then again, it's like nothing can't actually be precluded by anything because it's already not there. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's another good way to say it. Like, the nothing is so self-consistency that it's not even there, ever. And then so, like, due to that, then we seem to have the something. We seem to have the phenomenal. We seem to have, like, the very particular. We seem to have the very real seeming. I mean, even if, like, regardless of what our worldview is, like, whether we think of matter as and stuff as having inherent existence, or if we only think of it as being a manifestation of our own subjectivities. You know, whether we're a materialist or an idealist, it doesn't matter. That either way, there's something that seems real. You know, there's or even if you don't think it's real, or even if it doesn't seem real to you, there is something that seems, you know? There's a seeming. There's something that seems, or even if you think there's nothing that seems, there's something that's seemed to, you know? There's something that reality seems one way or another too. And so it's hard to say that there's not anything when there's at least something that seems, you know, it at least seems like there's experience. And by the word seems, it's like that kind of necessarily implies something like experience. But it's kind of like both at the same time. And I'm trying to figure out if that's contradictory or it's not contradictory. I'm thinking it's not contradictory for there to at least be a seeming something, and also for there to be nothing. There's something and nothing at the same time, and that seems like it's as contradictory as it could be. But also, it's not. You know? I don't know where to go from here. I'm kind of just back where I started. As in, I feel back where I started, and weirdly enough, this is has occurred geographically in, you know, my apparent relation to the material world. I'm physically back where I started. As well as mentally. I feel as if everything that I've said does not is not suggesting any particular path forward in terms of talking. And I'm now in this moment experiencing that as a form of difficulty, which is weird considering all that time I spent describing that as a type of freedom. For instance, maybe I'm left with the question of, the question of have I made claims that need further shoring up, that need further evidence? Am I missing things? And I'm almost sure that I'm missing things, that what I've been saying has been a particular point of view that necessarily misses other points of view, or misses other ways of interpreting things. That all of this is also a reflection of my own partiality and incompleteness and incompletableness. Well, let me rephrase it. There's definitely incompleteness on display here. But I wish to be as thorough as possible so that I may demonstrate actual incompletableness in principle, as opposed to an incomplete that's only incomplete due to some kind of flaw like laziness or ignorance. But then again, at the same time, I guess if it were due to laziness or ignorance, then those would also be manifestations of incompletableness. But now what I'm actually talking about is sort of like the space of alternatives, the space of possibilities. And I'm kind of indirectly talking about free will, as in suggesting that I could be otherwise, or that I could be more thorough or more rigorous. Versus you know, an absence of free will type of reality, in which if I have character flaws, then I just have character flaws. But when I'm talking about free will or not, at this point, it occurs to me that either worldview, the worldview in which we do have free will and we, you know, make our choices and so on, versus a worldview in which there is no free will and the world moves along either mechanistically or randomly or some combination thereof, and there is no free will. I think this actually boils down to something else. There's two possibilities here that I'm thinking of that this may boil down to. One of them, that those two differing worldviews are actually reflections of like different moral positionings of the world, and that they're not actually like a substantial dichotomy between the world moving along mechanistically or randomly versus individuals having free will. There's not a substantial irreconcilable dichotomy between those two worldviews, but there's a difference in the in a moral positioning in that. There could be said that there is individual free will, but what's meant by that what is expressed in the notion of individual free will is the open potentiality aspect of reality, the open potentiality for the subject. The sort of unwritten aspect of reality. Which corresponds to the future, you know? It means that the future is not determined for the experiencing subject. Which really is true. I mean, and then like, even if simultaneously you're like sort of holding on to a model of reality that is kind of mechanistic and that like, you know, where like subjective time is subjective, the subjective experience of time is not a fundamental quality of the objective world, and that it's simply an artifact of our individual subjectivities, and that we are, you know, even if you're hanging on to this kind of model of the world where we are, as an individual person, we're moving through and experiencing a determined world, or even a totally random world, through linear temporality, and that, like, you know, you would say, like, in the fundamental laws of physics, there is no time, that temporality is perfectly reversible, and therefore, you know, the future is, in a sense, like, written. Even if you're one of those, I would say that there is still the unknown. There's still the unknownness of that corresponds with the future, the unknown quality of it. That, you know, is an inescapable aspect of experience. The unknown and unknowable aspect of reality. Which actually, you know, applies to more than just the future. Like, there's many aspects of the past that are also unknown, or aspects of, you know, places remote to us in the same time. I mean, of course, you know, you and I, we all know that there's no objective now, even in terms of just basic relativity. But as kind of a shorthand for like how we move around the world every day, we think of, you know, 3 o'clock being 3 o'clock, or even if we think of somebody on the other, in a different time zone, you know, having, you know, a different spatial relationship to where the sun is in the sky and so forth, that, you know, our 3 o'clock is their 2 o'clock, and that there's, you know, that we are experiencing all this, we're all experiencing the same now and moving through it. I mean, it's not true even in terms of just relativity, but as kind of a practical construct, it works for our society, or depending on who you ask. Some might say it doesn't work, or that it's not working for our society. And so what I'm getting at with all that is that this notion of free will kind of just pertains to the relationship between this unknown and unknowable aspect of reality with the known aspect of reality. And that relationship could kind of be said to also be what the self is, like what where if we're trying to locate like where this thing called experience and consciousness is, or what it is, I would say that it's something that lies at this nexus between the known and the unknown, and that this is also what constitutes the now, or like our perception of a time that is now. Whereas the known corresponds with the past and that which is unchangeable, and it corresponds with the outside objective world that we don't have control over, and that the unknown kind of is analogous to the future, at least analogous to the future, to potentiality, or like is analogous to like the unobserved photon that exists only in wave state, only exists in a probabilistic state. The uncollapsed waveform, you know. The known and the past correspond to the collapsed particle. the collapsed waveform into an observed particle. And like it would seem kind of obvious to say that like experience depends on something. I mean, essentially experience like is the something. Like there's no something, there's no anything at all, obviously, without experience. Even if you go in the abstract sense and like, even if you are like essentially a materialist and be like, you say like, no, even if, you know, all beings on the planet die and there's no life, there's still a universe, even if you're of that persuasion, it's like still this like a universe continuing on without any subjectivity in it is itself merely an abstract thought that occurs to a subject, that occurs in experience. And it's like conceiving a universe abstractly that has no experiencers in it is a weird thing to do, and it's weird because like in what terms do you conceive of that universe, you know? Because you're conceiving it in terms of it having characteristics, and those characteristics necessarily only occurring like in your experience, or at least, or like in, you know, principally in any experiencer, you know. It's like there's sort of a sense in which like intuitively in our everyday going in the sort of way we think about the world and going about our everyday lives, it sort of intuitively makes sense that like, you know, like I will die and the world someday, and the world will continue to go on without me, of course. And then you could kind of logically extend that to like, oh, someday everybody I know is going to be dead, and actually and then you can extend it to like, also someday, like, you know, if anything we know about astronomy is true, that like the sun is gonna, you know, expand into a red giant, and it'll engulf the earth, and, you know, it'll just incinerate the earth. There's no really chance of life continuing, and, you know, unless you like think that humans can colonize space, which personally I doubt, but I guess like in principle it's not impossible. And so, like, you know, you can logically extend this to like the possibility of a universe existing without any life. But then there's this question, you know, and without any experiencers, no experience, just like an objective world existing out there. Sort of, you know, in our everyday logic, that seems to make sense. But if you just spend some time thinking about it, it gets weird. Because it's like, in what meaningful sense does that world exist? That there's absolutely no experience of it. It doesn't exist to anything or anyone. And I won't like kind of like rehash all the stuff about like sort of in like in physics, you know, observer dependency and this sort of emerging worldview that's kind of increasingly, that's meeting increasing acceptance. That it is actually observation that creates the world. You know, it's meeting increasing acceptance in the physics world, but then it's also a very old idea and in Eastern thought. That basically, like, if you are thinking of the Big Bang as the birth of the universe, like, rather than thinking of the Big Bang as like this objective event where space and time began, you think about it as actually this kind of horizon of human conception and thinking. And not of course not in the sense that like you know, obviously it's not like that humans were alive at the Big Bang, but that if you take right now in the present, like our scientific worldview, and then like I'll do this for other things too, like other worldviews too, not just the Big Bang and not just the rational scientific worldview. If you take this worldview and like the fairly like, you know, rigorous science that's gone about observing the universe, and the consistency and rigor that's gone into devising the Big Bang Theory, where you know, you have the entire universe emerging from kind of a singularity, and when you think backwards in time towards this point of the Big Bang, you have all of space condensing and condensing and condensing into essentially a point so small as to be nothing. And also in accordance with, like, the laws of relativity, you have time being distorted increasingly as you get there, to where like in the presence of a large gravitational field, time is what slowed down or sped up, depending on how you look at it, whether you're talking about subjective or objective. So if you think towards the Big Bang, like going back in time towards it, with space contracting into nothing and time kind of also contracting into nothing, you could think of that as an objective thing that happened, or you can think of that as sort of you could think of that also as just the limit of our own human worldview that we have, that is the physics that we have, the laws of nature that are strongly suggesting this Big Bang. These physics are in fact reflections of our own human cognition, and that our cognition has limits, and those limits manifest in our worldview as the limitation of the world described as the Big Bang. And then that same sort of like reversal, if you will, would apply also, like, if you're thinking forward in time, whether we think of there's going to be the big crunch, like, and that's just like the sort of mirror process of the Big Bang, where space and time again contract into nothing. Same thing here. That is also our model of the world reaching its limit. That is kind of human cognition showing its limit. And I don't mean like human cognition as an objective, unchangeable thing. I just mean that is the limit that that's kind of the limit that's expressed by our current present cognition and our current present worldview as we understand the world. So for instance, like if you took a creationist worldview, you still have a beginning of the world where God created the world. And you could think of this creation event as not as an objective thing that occurred, but you could think of that as expressing a cognitive and worldview limit, where, you know, wherein we cannot conceive of the eternal, we cannot conceive of something without a beginning, and we cannot conceive of something like seeming to exist without having been created. But I mean, when I say this, it all sounds very very kind of just interpretive. But it's like, when I'm talking about something as rigorous as like our physical models of reality, it's not that I'm saying that it's not that I'm saying at all that physics is a sham. On the contrary, it's like I'm saying that physics is an incredibly consistent model. I mean, and I mean that about Newtonian physics has just remarkable consistency and predictive powers across a very impressive scale of things. And then at beyond certain scales of, like, you know, certain scales of mass and distance and time and speeds, so on, like it no longer holds, and then you have to have like special and general relativities models of reality in order to explain things more consistently. And then at certain other scales, like at the, like, you know, this very granular particle scale, it's like you have to have quantum theory in order to explain things consistently. And so these, you know, these are like remarkably useful and rigorous models of the world. But I'm kind of saying that they may actually be more aptly described as models of our experience. as revealing something of the shape of subjectivity, of what it, it's like you can say, yeah, they're describing the world that we experience, but also they're describing what it's like to experience. But at the same time that there's so many different shapes of experience, not just possible, but that you can even kind of plainly infer. You may never be able to grab. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not. Okay, let me put it this way. By having any experience at all, it must be a particular experience. In order to experience anything at all, you must have a particular point of view. Because it's not possible to experience the grand totality of everything, because that would equate to non-experience, non-duality. By experiencing anything at all, you have to have a particular experience, which necessarily precludes all the other shapes of experience, all the other points of view. And so it's just like not possible in principle to experience all the other experiences, all the other forms of experience. And you can infer this very plainly in a myriad of ways. One way is to think about the experience of other life forms. So for instance, like, we know that dogs, like especially certain breeds of dogs, may have poor eyesight, but have this incredible sense of smell where they're, it's like they live in this vast, rich, olfactory world that is like this, three-dimensional smellscape in which they can even perceive like something that was here in time, and by the intensity of a certain scent, like know how long ago some animal was here and in what direction it went, and all this stuff, and we cannot experience that ourselves. We can just kind of project and create a model based in our own shape of experience, what that is like. And so to have this vague abstract model of what it's like, but we cannot ever inhabit that experience of a dog without being a dog. But then you can't, like, that experience can't transfer over, And just another way that personally I can infer the existence of these like drastically different other forms of experience is that I can remember certain dreams, or rather, more accurately, I can remember remembering certain dreams, because I will remember that in the process of waking up from a certain dream, it becomes apparent to me that the whole world of that dream is not even going to be able to translate well towards my normal human experience. So for instance, I have a memory of a dream in which something occurred along the lines of I was watching a movie, but also at the same time I was a character in that movie. And that's like kind of an impossible experience to have in this, in this in my human mode of experience, because those things have to occur, would have to occur sequentially. So like in my memory, it kind of translates over as to, first I was watching a movie, and then later in the dream I was a character in that movie, or the movie became reality. But then I know also that that's not exactly how it happened. It was more something like simultaneousness, but that's also impossible to be experiencing two different viewpoints like perfectly simultaneously. And so all I can really know is that the laws of nature, so to speak, that pertain to that dream are not the same laws of nature that pertain to this world, and temporality did not function in the same way. With that, in some sense, there wasn't the same type of like sequentialness and linearity in time in that dream world, but that I knew in the process of waking up that essentially, at least in terms of my subjective experience, the laws of nature were changing from that dream world to my, what I refer to as my everyday waking life. And that I wanted to, retain something of that dream, but I knew that whatever I would be able to retain would be at best kind of a translation of what happened in that dream over to normal waking reality. So, and like just as another example, like I have a vague memory of a dream in which I was a picture. I was a picture of a crystal on a wall. But then it's like, that doesn't make any sense, because of like, there's not really even in principle like something like an experience to being a picture, like it's not a living thing that has any subjective experience, or even really any possibility of having experience in the way that we think of what experience is. But somehow in this like dream world, that was the reality. And so this is all just to say, and I can also remember several times in dreaming, especially when having a lucid dream, that is, I know that I'm dreaming while I'm dreaming, and that I can control things to a certain extent. I know that I remember telling myself while having a lucid dream that this experience feels just as vividly real as any other experience, as any waking life experience. That this feels in no way less real. That like, I'm flying through the air on my own willpower and feeling the wind rush against my skin, and thinking to myself, this feels as real as anything feels. And then, then I wake up and I have a memory of that maybe in some ways the memory of that seems less real than, say, like a memory of something that actually happened a week ago. But I think that's only due to the fact that the memory of flying through the air is not consistent with the rest of my memories, in the same way that my memory of going to a movie, like in the quote-unquote real world, is consistent with the rest of the story that I tell myself. You know what I mean? And it is like these memories that I attribute to real waking reality are always more or less consistent with my worldview, my model of physics, and so on. They don't defy my understanding of the physical laws of nature. Whereas my memory of flying through the air on my own willpower does defy my understanding of the physical world laws as they exist. So all of this is to say I don't know what all of this is to say. Just something like the world as we think we understand it to me seems like so incredibly mutable. As to leave really like a mind-boggling and somewhat even magical seeming, or I should just say like mystical seeming realm of unknownness. Like inescapably present. That just like, you know, is accessible in such close to hand and seemingly mundane ways. Like looking at an insect, looking at an ant, and trying to project myself into the ant's experience and being like, to the ant, is there a creator God? Or is there a big bang? Or to the ant, is there something like general relativity or quantum theory? Or I think to the ant, I think with regard to my projection of the ant's experience, you know, which is only something I can model after my own experience. I think that the ant must not have such a complex world of like social and emotional and intellectual constructions as I do. Like the ant doesn't have anything like art or debates about or you know, like spoken language and that sort of thing. And so like maybe like superficially it might be tempting for me to project into an ant like a much simpler and less sophisticated type of experience, you know. And like we do this all the time, and this is why like And I think this is a very pervasive misunderstanding of things, where we place ourselves, humans, at the top of the hierarchy of complexity in the universe. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that whoa, what a coinkydink. What a grand fucking coinkydink that we see ourselves as humans as the most complex thing that there is. And for instance, and like, you know, all the other life forms evolved to create us. You know, we are at the cutting edge of evolution in every way that we think of evolution. And for instance, according to our science, and this is perfectly consistent with science, and it's like a relatively real thing, as this is as true a statement as you can say, is that our brains are the most complex arrangements of matter in the universe that we know of. Isn't that interesting? Our brains are more complex arrangements of matter than a galaxy that we know of, and that is perfectly consistent with our like laws of chemistry and physics and so on and so forth. But I think that what that illustrates is not some perfectly, you know, coincidental fact about objective reality. I think that is indicating something about the nature of our laws of physics and our science and our and our modeling of what complexity is. That's telling us what our complexity is. That's telling us something about our perception. That is because that's, you know, the brain is supposedly like the seat and the location of all that we hold to be complex about our own human experience. About, it's supposedly the seat of the self, the seat of consciousness is supposedly somewhere in that brain. But this is, I think this is just telling us that it is our way of, it is our like shape of perceiving and conceiving of the world that is leading to that as a conclusion, you know. And the same for like why we perceive ourselves as the most complex life form that we know of. It's just that's just an artifact of the way that we perceive. It's an artifact of like, that's like what creates the locality of experience, you know? Like, me as a person, I'm more intimately acquainted with all of the subtleties and details of my own particular experience than I can ever possibly be with anyone else's or anything else's point of view. And therefore, necessarily, me as an individual, I'm always trying to relate to another person or the rest of the world through some form of projecting like my own model that's based on my own intimacy with my own locality. Know what I mean? And that's necessarily a limitation, but when I speak of all these things as like limitations. I don't want you to get to the sense that it's a moral failing. It's not actually a moral failing. It's actually just a fact of the way that locality of perception occurs. It's actually just a fact of the way that the partiality and incompleteness of there being anything manifests in particular viewpoints. It's like if you have a particular viewpoint, then like necessarily, like I cannot gain access to all of the intimate details and complexity of the ant's viewpoint, or for that matter the tree's viewpoint, or for that matter the rock's viewpoint. You know, these are just different, these are just like differences in degree of likeness or difference. But not an objective likeness or objective difference. It's likeness or difference in accordance with the terms that we are able to perceive. So I mean, it's kind of tempting to wind all of this into a somewhat easy moral conclusion of that we should be trying to expand our circles of empathy and to, you know, be less certain in our viewpoints or something like that, which I certainly don't disagree with that, but I think more to the point of what I'm saying is something like the closer you could get to a totally broad understanding, the more that equates to like something like a total like dissipation of subjectivity, I think, which I don't think is ultimately possible. In the sense that, well, let me just put it this way. Maybe that like I can start to expand my circles of empathy to include more and more people and more people who are more and more different than myself, and who think and behave in ways more and more different than myself and appear different than myself. And sure, that's all possible, I think, and probably necessary for there to be a world that's not a total fucking hellscape. And also I can expand my circles of empathy to, you know, include more and more animals, and to have some cognizance of the possibility of an animal's suffering and the preventability of that. And you know, I can sort of widening it in concentric circles towards like beings that whose form of experiencing the world appear to me increasingly different than my own. So like then, you know, maybe I get to a plant and like I can observe the way that a plant grows and behaves and interacts with the environment. And like, you know, I watched BBC Green Planet, where they have all this very sophisticated time-lapse photography on plants, and you can see them, you know, interacting with their environment as if they are sentient like an animal, just on a slower time scale. And so I can, you know, I can kind of infer that there may be some kind of form of subjectivity in a plant. Some, you know, that there is some kind of corresponding interiority that corresponds to the observed exteriority that I observe of a plant. You know, and so like, but then it doesn't necessarily follow that I then anthropomorphize a plant, and that I treat a plant morally in the same way that I would treat like a dog or a human, and be like, and say that, you know, this plant has all of the rights as a human. You know, it should be able to vote, should be able to drive a car, etc. Because I like that's kind of assuming that these other beings would have the same like worldview as me as a human, and that's kind of ridiculous. Like, nature doesn't have the same morality that humans do. And I don't even know if a plant would have the same type of like conception of itself as a separate individual from the world as a human does. Like, I don't know like how the plant experiences living and dying. I can't know. And then, like, you know, similarly, like, I'm describing this as they're being sort of, I'm describing that they're being sort of like a scale of likeness or difference in terms of my ability to project my own shape of experience onto other beings. And so, like, if I get to something like a bacteria, you know, single-celled organisms, it becomes like increasingly difficult to like apply some model that's based on my human experience to the subjectivity of that, or like it there starts to become a fuzzy line of where, you know, where I draw the line between having interiority or subjectivity or not when it comes to like a virus. It's such, some viruses are such simple organisms that it's like they're like a step away from just being like an enzyme, or like just being a molecule that we don't typically ascribe as being alive or being a life form, you know, like the line is fuzzy, and you could go into that with like computers and AI, like, but I'm not going to do that here. But that line, that line between interiority, like between having subjectivity and not, is fuzzy as you go down the scale, like away from your own experience. But that is not a statement about objective reality. That is a statement with regards to our own perception of interiority versus exteriority. That is a statement about our own experience and perception and conception about what subjective versus objective is. Because if you go anywhere else on that scale, the viewpoint, the lines are not going to be drawn in the same way. Like if you have a pathogenic virus, that virus does not have anything like the human experience. It's not that virus is not going to have this hierarchy scale that in any way resembles what we ascribe to, whether it be explicitly or implicitly through our behaviors, you know. Because the virus in whatever form of interiority is there, we can presume it just wants to promulgate that interiority and proliferate, you know, at the expense of what other organism it is essentially parasitizing. It's like the cold virus proliferates at our expense, and we have zero qualms about killing a cold virus, you know. We have zero qualms about killing thousands and thousands. I mean, I don't know how many individual virus cells constitute a cold infection, but certainly, as no matter how vegan we are, we have no qualms about killing those cold viruses. And no virus has any qualms about destroying its host. And anything like, and this is where like describing viruses having intentions even is iffy, because it's maybe sometimes better described as just having properties that lead to its behaviors, you know? But then it's like, if we really are to project ourselves into this, to like this imagined interiority of the virus, then it's like the virus probably doesn't even perceive a human being, of how, like, through the virus does not even have perceptual organs through which it could perceive something like a human being, you know? It could at best just perceive what's around it. And by perceive, I just mean like have chemical interactions, have chemical reactions with its immediate environment. It's like that's all it does. It's like, so it's like, we don't have like a personal grudge against the cold virus, or maybe we do, but we understand that it's kind of silly that the virus is just doing what a virus does. It doesn't hate us. It doesn't think the virus doesn't think humans suck. It's just like doing the thing that is an expression of how it is in the world and how it exists. It doesn't even have something like a perception of a human. And then just like, you know, to the virus, like, again, like, is there a Big Bang, or is there a special relativity, or is there a quantum theory, or is there a creator virus who created all viruses and created virus hell and virus heaven? Do viruses go to virus hell or virus heaven when they die? Like, does a virus have, you know, its version of an idea of a Big Bang? No, a virus doesn't even have an idea. Maybe what I'm trying to get at here is that, like, if there were something like, you know, like actually understanding the world, like, what would you have to understand? You would have to understand like ways of being that don't even have a feature like understanding, that don't even have a feature like an idea, or that don't even have something like perception as such. And all of the corresponding like external realities from all those different interiorities would be just as drastically different, but no less full, you know what I mean? It's like, it's tempting to want to think of like there being some other experience that's like less full than our own experience. And like, by some great coincidence, it's pretty much like we pretty much all feel like nobody else's experience is as full as ours, that we have the most experience, the most like complex experiences of anybody else, and everybody else is just like, you know, like everybody else just has the fault of not understanding us enough. But that's not, I don't think that's true at all. Like listen, can you point to like an experience that you have that's like in some way less full than another experience that you have? Even if like you're like, oh yeah, I had like, you know, such a wonderful, like fulfilling experience this one time, and I felt so alive and connected to the world. And then there's this other time when I was so, you know, bored and lifeless and depressed or whatever. And so like that's definitely a difference in quality, but I don't think it's a difference in complexity. It's like your experience of boredom is just as real as your experience of, you know, like ecstasy or whatever it is. Like just as full in that, it's just as full as in that, like it is the totality of your experience. Like if something is the totality of your experience, it's your whole fucking world. And so if, you know, if an ant has an experience, that's its whole fucking world, and it is a whole fucking world. That we can only imagine is inconceivably different than our own. And then it extends to, okay, I guess the battery is dying here, but that's